Humanity in Crisis will bring to you some of the biggest issues that exist in our world today. Each programme will tackle a different crisis, from gender equality and conflict zones through to poverty and child labour. In recent times, the world has been going through some profound transformations, and we live in a society that's rapidly changing. The global economy is in a fragile state, with many countries in the grip of an economic meltdown. And every day, new questions arise for governments to answer on how to beat the economic downturn, not only locally, but globally. Today's programme will investigate the issue of recession, the causes and the impact on individuals as well as nations. But first, let's see what the great British public know on this matter.
Recession is when people find it hard to spend money.
Well, from my knowledge, it's when all the banks got in a bit of trouble with giving out loans to people that couldn't repay them, and it affected the rest of the economy.
Banks have lent out too much money and now we have to pay for it.
I would say a recession is where the economy goes into negative growth and things start to get a bit worse.
We've experienced recession on a number of occasions in recent times, from the mid-70s till now. And economic downturns don't always happen for the same reason, as economics expert Jonathan Portis explains.
Technically, economists define as a recession as 2 quarters, that's 6 months where output is falling. But more generally, a recession is just a prolonged period when the economy is doing badly, when output is either weak or falling. And a global recession is simply where that's happening not just in one country, but in most, if not all, of the countries, at least in the developed world. Recessions can be caused by a number of things. So, for example, a price shock, such as a sharp rise in oil prices, can cause recession, or, as we've recently seen, a financial crisis, just as it did in the 1920s, can cause a global recession.
The recession has hit internationally, but where did it begin? Where are its roots?
The recession that we're living through now, which has lasted for some 5 years of quite depressed levels of economic activity in much of the world, especially in the developed countries, in the Western countries, really began in 2007 in the American housing market. A whole lot of households that had been sold mortgages could not repay the mortgages. They were sold mortgages for houses that they could not possibly repay, and they began to default. And the result was that there was a panic in the whole financial system, a fear of wholesale bankruptcies. And so the American economy began to contract. Many European banks had bought securities that contained these dud mortgages, these mortgages that were failing. And so the value of their securities collapsed. And so the whole asset base of even the European banks began to shrink. So the European banks cut back their lending. Households and firms in Europe began to worry about the future, so they cut back their spending. And so the thing jumped across the Atlantic from North America to Europe in 2008.
The UK, despite being one of the world's biggest economies, has experienced an immense economic downturn, resulting in a double-dip recession in 2011. This term simply means that the economy goes back into a recession before it's had a chance to recover its previous economic output. According to the Office for National Statistics, at the end of 2012, Britain's economy took a turn for the worse as the GDP decreased by 0.3% in the last quarter. But what is GDP exactly, and how does it impact the economy?
GDP, gross domestic product, is just a measure of the total value of all the stuff that the economy produces in a given period. So that stuff, everything from televisions made in factories, through to strawberries grown into fields, through to video games sold to foreigners. It also includes stuff which doesn't have a market value but still counts, like schools teaching pupils. So when GDP is growing, the economy as a whole, the amount of stuff that we're producing is growing, and when it's falling, that means that things are going badly and the economy is shrinking.
With the effects of the recession widespread, each one of us is likely to know somebody who's been affected. According to the Office for National Statistics, living standards for average Britain has seen its biggest drop in a generation at the beginning of 2013, coinciding with a fall in disposable income by 1.7%. We asked the average person on the street if they'd also felt the brunt of the economic meltdown.
Well, as a small business, we find that people take longer to pay, and that they also want to pay less for what they're getting. So we end up having less to pay other people.
The recession itself hasn't really affected me in such a way, but I have noticed it because I grew up in a small town, and you see all the independent businesses and small businesses all closing down that were there, making the town quite special to the people.
I'm looking to do a further degree and I won't be able to afford it because it's £9,000 a year. Even if I have a part-time or a full-time job for a year, I won't be able to afford to pay the whole 5 years off myself.
Well, I mean, I got made redundant earlier this year and it's been really quite difficult for me to find a job. I mean, I have got a job now, but it was a lot more difficult, and I think that must be due to the recession. It's taken me quite a few months.
Severe problems with the economy are damaging, and the reality of the impact of the recession can be seen in many ways.
Unemployment.
The lack of job security, pay cuts and reduction in work hours has been widely shared across all population groups, and in some nations like the US and Spain, unemployment has risen to historic heights.
Reduced lending.
A decline in bank lending results in lower investments. A shortage of mortgages results in less people buying houses, weakening the housing market.
Construction industry.
With reduced spending on homes comes reduced requirement to build new homes, and with a decline in business, there is lesser need for new office buildings and other professional establishments.
Consumer spending.
Expectations are important factors in establishing the rate of economic growth. If confidence is high, people spend. If confidence is low, people fear losing their jobs and spend less, contributing less to the economy, which in turn slows growth. These are just some of the impacts of an economic downturn, whether local or further afield. The current recession has pushed many people into redundancy and some into homelessness as a result of losing their mortgages and consequently their homes. What's the government doing to help these people?
The government's working hard to try and prevent particularly street homelessness, and there's a big strategy there, but also to try and bring empty properties back into use to reduce the cost of housing, to make it easier for people to buy their own house. So all of these things are about trying to make it easier for people who might be having some difficulty with their housing. But there's also a big push to make sure that we support people who are out of work for any length of time, people who've lost their job, and there's specialist help available from a local job centre.
While it's difficult to remain recession-proof, there are ways in which we can prioritise our lifestyles and budgets to mitigate any effects the recession may cause us. What strategies are the public employing to protect themselves?
I have to spend less to survive because I can't do anything else.
I'm shopping around looking for cheaper products or the same product but cheaper elsewhere.
Well, I think we've actually had to be much tighter with expenses, more tighter with how I spend my money, and when times get bad, you simply pay yourself less money.
I mean, I definitely check prices for things more than I ever would have before. I'm really conscious of what I'm spending. I don't go out as much, and I mean, holidays, I haven't had one in years.
Many people have been affected by the financial crisis and are adopting different means in order to put their finances in order to secure themselves against a slump. Despite the International Monetary Fund's praise for the UK government's response to the first recession, high levels of household debt, job cuts and a decline in the country's GDP have made us all sceptical of the pace of recovery. The Bank of England has intervened in an attempt to counter these issues with quantitative easing. Although a Bank of England report into the government's initial quantitative easing policy suggested it helped to increase the UK's annual economic output by 2%, analysts beg to differ.
Well, what quantitative easing is essentially the Bank of England trying to pump more money into the economy by essentially buying government bonds from the private sector, especially the banks, and in return crediting them with effectively cash on deposit at the Bank of England. And the idea is the banks, hopefully, will go and lend that to the real economy and help restart economic activity. Unfortunately, so far it hasn't quite worked out that way.
With lending at an all-time low, how can businesses keep afloat when capital is hard to come by? If our very recent history is anything to go by, some companies can thrive during a period of financial crisis. The expansion of Virgin Records during the 1970s recession and the growth of Virgin Atlantic in the early 1990s, when established airlines were still feeling the effects of the Gulf War and recession, is a precedent which many manufacturing and entertainment industries can take heed from today. The National Chamber of Commerce called upon the government to offer stronger backing to small and medium-sized businesses in order to stimulate growth. I asked member of our ruling coalition, Sarah Tether, how the government is planning to accommodate this demand and boost entrepreneurship.
In my experience, the biggest barrier for a lot of small and medium-sized companies is being able to get money from the bank. Banks stop lending to a lot of companies, and that's made it really difficult. And that's been the focus of the work of my colleague Vince Cable. And one of the things that he's doing is to set up a British business bank that will lend £10 billion to business in particular, to make sure that we can actually get people moving again.
Although British businesses are justifiably grieving from a lack of credit from banks, a culture of entrepreneurialism can go a long way to inspiring growth, recovery and survival. An initiative of this kind is Startup Britain. I went along to one of their events to find out more. This event is Startup Entertainment, organised by Startup Britain, a national campaign set up 3 years ago by 8 entrepreneurs with the backing of the government. Their aim? Well, to bring together the expertise of Britain's leading business people to inspire and accelerate enterprise in the UK. Startup Entertainment seeks to give information, advice and help to people with ideas aspiring to set up a business. Today's event has a focus on the entertainment sector, and to tell me more about it is co-founder of Startup Britain, Emma Jones. Emma, good to meet you.
Hello there.
Tell me, what led you to set up Startup Britain?
Well, Startup Britain was set up just under 3 years ago. It was started by 8 people who run their own businesses, helping the small business sector. And what we wanted to do was encourage more people in the UK to start a business and help existing businesses to grow. So we're serving both of those aims today.
So essentially, entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. So 8 entrepreneurs, but now, of course, since the campaign has been launched, we've had help from lots of people across the UK. We've done lots of activity, lots of events, gone on tour. All of this to the aim of making sure that the UK stays at the forefront of enterprise.
There's a good turnout today. How crucial is it to recognise the importance of startups in a recession climate?
I think it's more important than ever to recognise the value and importance of startups at the moment. The UK is seeing record numbers of people starting a business, so 484,000 new startups in 2012. This year, we're really hoping that the UK hits the 500,000 figure, and it's so important to be encouraging them at the moment because it will be startups that bring this economy out of recession. There's lots of them, they're generating lots of economic wealth, they're going global very quickly, so we've got to encourage them and then support them once they've started.
What advice can you give to businesses in terms of survival? We're in a recession.
So the best businesses that we're seeing start at the moment are businesses that have a niche, i.e. they've got a very clear product or service that's aimed at a very clear audience. The other thing they're doing is they're keeping their overheads low, so they're not necessarily taking on office space, they're building the business from home, they're using co-working facilities. There's lots of collaboration in the small business space at the moment, so rather than buying resources, people are sharing them. So the best businesses we're seeing, they've got a niche idea, they're keeping their overheads low, and they're really focused on making sales. Do that and you'll be okay.
The idea of setting up a business is a daunting prospect at the best of times, and more so during an economic downturn. It's very busy here today with people because they've come here to be inspired and get an insight into how they can make their business ideas a reality. I caught up with some of them earlier.
I'm here today to hear from professionals about how they set up their business, because I'm in the process of setting up my own business and I want to know more about how they did it.
What I've learned from today is really about focus, being focused and not letting anyone rain on your parade.
I'm here to network with other people who are into the entertainment industry and are trying to express their creativity through new startups.
If I can tap into people's ideas, I can then invest within their business. Not just investment in terms of money, but in terms of just my knowledge and the people that are around me.
Today I've learnt that there needs to be a lot more value than there is volume. You can't just push out a product if it's not got any value and no one wants it.
It's heartening to note that in the thick of an economic crisis, there are initiatives encouraging ways to restoring a healthy economy. Yet no one can deny how deep and far-reaching the problems are. Having said this though, not everyone's been affected. Although the majority have to tighten their belts, shrewd investors and businesses see in the economic downturn opportunities. A chance to capitalise by buying properties, antiquities and unwanted shares at a fraction of their market value. It would seem that a minority are gaining a distinct advantage amidst the financial woes. The UK has fared comparatively well during the recession compared to other countries. As the economic collapse has mutated into a global phenomenon, the reverberations felt across the board have been drastic. According to the International Monetary Fund, the wider impact of the American housing crisis has cost the world economy trillions, and official recessions were declared in 15 European Union countries. Although the impact's been felt worldwide, Europe finds itself at a crossroads. Many countries, mostly in southern Europe, produced austerity measures including tax rises alongside numerous cuts including salaries, pensions, benefits and social services with the objective of cutting government debts. This put pressure on already weak economies, sending them into recession.
The Eurozone, or the European Union as a whole, is our largest trading partner. So of course, when the economies of the Eurozone are weak, that depresses demand for the goods that we sell to them. Just as the same thing happens the other way. So the fact that both the UK and the Eurozone have been doing badly in recent years has generated a multiplier effect, which has dragged us both down.
Reading a text statement by EU's top economist Olli Rehn, European Commission spokesperson Chantal Hughes said that recent data showed slow signs of recovery.
The recent positive survey data are encouraging and suggest the European economy is gradually gaining momentum. They support the European Commission's 2013 spring forecasts and its projections for a subdued, mild recovery in the second half of 2013. This slightly more positive data is welcome, but there is no room for any complacency. Self-congratulatory statements suggesting that the crisis is over are definitely not for today. There are still substantial obstacles to overcome. The growth figures remain low and the tentative signs of growth are still fragile.
Mr. Rehn also said in the statement that EU members, Eurogroup members or not, should pursue their efforts towards tighter budget control and reforms. With many jobs lost here in the UK as a result of the recession, British people in work are becoming increasingly worried about losing their employment, and as a result are spending less, causing demand to plummet. In the face of this, how is the government planning to restore consumer confidence?
Well, I think one of the most important ways in which you can get people spending again is to put a little bit more cash in their pockets. And that's the reason why the government has reduced the amount of tax that everybody's paying, particularly those who are earning the least. And by changing the personal tax allowance, that just puts just a little bit of extra money back into people's pockets.
For the average person, it may feel like nothing bodes well for our economic future, but there are grounds for optimism. On the domestic front, the economy has regained some momentum, judging by the growth in UK exports and the expansion of the construction sector. The prospects for the economy have been boosted by the Bank of England's decision to keep interest rates at an all-time low, and the housing market has witnessed a rise in buy-to-let mortgages. Also, the government has implemented austerity measures in a bid to counter recession, but these measures have come under scrutiny from economists.
Well, the austerity measures, both here and perhaps even more so in the Eurozone, have certainly done an awful lot of damage to economic recovery over the last 2 years. Things do appear to be getting slightly better, but we still haven't seen the strong and sustainable recovery that we should have seen by now, and that is in large part due to premature austerity.
With the deficit and unemployment still at high levels, any talks of a sustainable recovery at this point would be premature. The National Institute for Economics and Social Research states that UK growth is accelerating, but any further contractions would see us back to square one. Moving forward, the question on everybody's lips is how do we achieve a strong, sustainable and equitable recovery?
Clearly, one major element is to regulate the banks more tightly so that they lend less in boom times. And a second main element that is much more immediate is that government should increase their spending, even out of borrowing, in order to stimulate the private sector.
The biggest thing that holds people back from starting a business in Britain is the confidence to give it a go. We see a big role for Startup Britain in doing that, but the government and others can play a role in making that happen. So we've got to encourage more people to start, and once they've started, we've got to give them the right support to grow, to give them access to markets, so open up government contracts so more people can get government contracts, big companies to pay more on time so it helps businesses grow with the cash flow they need.
Well, there are lots of things government could do. First of all, policy could be better in terms of how much the government is spending and borrowing. There is no reason when spending is depressed for the government not to borrow somewhat more and spend it on useful programs. Second, we need a better education system, particularly for those young people who don't currently go to university. Third, we need better welfare to work programs to ensure that young people who are unemployed are supported into jobs.
The key message coming through global businesses and economies through what seems to be a never-ending economic recession is adapt to survive. However, for already weaker economies and nations, sometimes even that isn't enough to save them. Talks of a solution to the crisis are proving harder than expected, and there's no simple answers to these questions. Although there may be shoots of recovery, people are still doing everything they can to stay afloat, whilst governments are trying to put in place measures to try to bring some stability back into their economies. Although we're feeling the impact here, the UK is in actual fact in better position than most countries to weather the storm. Boom and bust are symptomatic of capitalism, and so the cycle of rise and fall in world economies will continue.